For more, let's go to Parliament Hill and welcome the Federal Justice Minister Arif Virani. Minister, good to see you again.
Thank you.
Now, you've said an online hate bill is an absolute priority for your government. This was first promised in the 2019 Liberal platform, as well in 2021, promising a bill within 100 days of that election. So why are we here in December 2023 still waiting for that legislation?
This legislation is a fundamental priority for me and for the Prime Minister. It's really, really important to address the multiple facets that people are facing when we're talking about online security and to ensure we get the bill right. We've been doing extensive consultations on the bill, but it is really critical to ensure that protections that exist for people in the physical world are replicated for the online world, because we know that is where more and more of Canadians are existing in terms of that internet space, that cyberspace. So it's really critical that we get it right, and we're putting in the work to make sure that we do get it right. Protecting Canadians who are victims of any criminality is fundamentally my job. I was pleased to be able to do that with the passage of Bill C-48 on bail reform. This is complementary to that work, ensuring that physical protections are replicated in the online space.
So in terms of what's actually going to be in this bill when it does come to Parliament, there is an open letter from experts and advocates last week saying Canadian children are at greater risk from reckless social media platforms. They want those web giants held responsible for their advertising, for their design, for their content moderation. Are these specific elements that you're going to be looking at for this bill?
There's obviously a component here when we're talking about online giants and online companies and their engagement. We've been engaging with them extensively thus far, but there's also a critical component about children's safety and, in fact, the safety of various vulnerable sectors. I was quite affected by what happened about 2 weeks ago with that child in BC, the little boy at the age of 12 who decided to take his own life after being intimidated and sextorted online. I have my own 2 boys at home, one of whom is 12 years old. It prompted a lot of difficult discussions within my own household. I'm sure those discussions were replicated around the country. We are all concerned about the safety of kids, the safety of anyone who's vulnerable, because so much of their lives are being lived online. And that is what is motivating us to both pass this bill, but also get it right before we table it. I think it's really critical also that Canadians understand we're already looking at things like sextortion. When we made changes to the sex offender registry in Bill S-12, which is already passed in Parliament, we included sextortion as a crime for which one would need to be registered under the sex offender registry, recognizing the gravity and the significance of the situation and how predators are preying on our young people.
Now, there's been a lot of talk about how measures are going to be enforced. Will you need a new regulator for compelling online companies to take action?
So I think what Canadians should understand is that we're guided by a number of different facets. We're guided by things that relate to the criminal code, things that relate to the Canadian Human Rights Act, things that relate to sort of what we've also seen in other jurisdictions. Part of the consultations that were done by the Minister of Heritage previously and currently by Minister Saint-Onge is that they were looking at examples of what's been working and not working in international jurisdictions. So we've been looking at Australia, we've been looking at Germany, France, the EU, to try to understand what works best and what hasn't worked so that we can perfect that and find that correct balance here in Canada that's going to work for and produce the results that Canadians want to see. But I think ultimately it's just about that basic proposition that we've already got protections for people in the physical world. We're trying to ensure that we replicate those protections for the online or digital world.
Now, there's also, as you know, a lot of talk about how all this relates to freedom of expression in this country and criticism that measures could lead us down a slippery road towards more censorship. So as you're going through this process of working towards this bill, how are you going to make that balance between public safety and between people's rights to expression?
Well, I think the most important thing for Canadians to understand is that freedom of expression is protected in Section 2B of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That is something that I'm sworn and duty-bound and oath-bound to uphold as the Minister of Justice. That is always my fundamental priority. It's a hallmark of our democracy. It's what makes us what we are. That being said, Canadians should also understand that we have certain limits on freedom of expression in this country already. We can talk about facile areas such as copyright or patent law, but we can also talk about the protections that protect against hate speech that exist as right now in our criminal code that have been upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada. So when we talk about are there justifiable limits on freedom of expression, there are in Canada. Those have been upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada. That's important. And we're taking our guidance from the Supreme Court of Canada. What I would say to people is that they ask me, well, how would you define hatred, Minister Virani? And I say to them, it's not my own home-baked definition of hatred. I'll take my cues from the Supreme Court of Canada and what they've decided in jurisprudence. In case law, they've actually said we're talking about detestation and vilification of a person or a group. We're not talking about things that we don't like. We're not talking about insults. We're not even talking about harmful language. We're talking about language that talks about extermination of a group, for example. That's significant. That's what arises to detestation and vilification and crosses that hatred threshold. That's what we're talking about. And we're talking about it a lot right now, given the geopolitical context that we're in. We're seeing a lot of hatred in Canada that's starting to manifest, and it's starting with a lot of hatred that's being communicated online.
All right. Justice Minister Arif Virani, appreciate your time on this.
Thank you very much.